Well, good evening. Good evening, and thank you so much for being here tonight. My name's David Sittenfeld. I am the director of the Center for the Environment here at the Museum of Science. I use the pronouns he and him. I am very excited to welcome you to this celebration of Dr. Robert Bullard's foundational lifelong work in the field of environmental justice. And I'll be formally introducing our president, Tim Ritchie, in just a few moments to get the festivities going. But first, I wanted to situate tonight's program in the context of what we've been doing here at the museum for 2024, the entire year, on the topic of climate change. As you may have seen in the lobby as you entered the museum tonight, or as you may have seen on the museum's website when you learned about tonight's program, we've dedicated this year to one of the most important science issues of our time, the year of the Earthshot. Throughout this year, we've explored equitable and innovative solutions to the environmental crises and the challenges facing our communities, with a focus on the way that humans are transforming the ways that we live, work, eat, and move to create a sustainable and equitable future. I think for this audience to hear what I just said, anybody who's read one of Dr. Bullard's work knows that he has deeply inspired the way that we framed and designed the over 1,000 experiences that we've offered this year in the museum, online, and in schools. And that's because here at the Museum of Science, we believe that a resilient, zero-carbon, healthy, and equitable future is only possible if everyone is involved in making that future a reality, and that the disproportionate impacts of climate change can only be equitably addressed if communities and decision makers share their perspectives and their local knowledge with one another to envision and co-create solutions together so that all communities will be safer and will benefit from the innovations of a transformed and more resilient planet. That's what tonight's celebration of Dr. Bullard's work is all about. We're situating this award celebration as a catalyst for much more that's happening this weekend. Right now, at this very moment, at the New England Aquarium, we're kicking off our first ever Youth Climate Summit with 100 youth who will spend the next 2 days talking about and developing solutions to the climate crisis. If you come here tomorrow, you will see them. The digital artistic pieces that you encountered in the lobby are visual representations of the ideas and perspectives of thousands of youth around the country who participated in the first ever museum's youth poll this April, and the museum's work in characterizing urban heat islands here in communities across our region. Tomorrow, a group of national and local change makers working on environmental justice issues, some of them are here in the audience, will be here to talk with our visitors and with one another alongside these youth in an exciting event that we're calling Champions for Environmental Justice. We hope you'll join us. Thanks to Bonsell Philanthropies and to the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center for making these events that will amplify and extend the impact of tonight's award possible. And now, please welcome the President of the Museum of Science, Tim Ritchie.
Thank you, David. And this evening very much is about the year of the Earthshot, and it is very much inspired by our honoree tonight. I do want to say it's also inspired by the guy you just heard from, David Sittenfeld. Many of you are in the audience because you know and you trust David Sittenfeld. You're here because you realize the museum wants to become something new and relevant to the world around us. So before we get into the rest of the evening, which will all be about Dr. Bullard, can you give our friend David Sittenfeld a round of applause? I'm tempted to ask for a show of hands for how many of you here this is your first Brad Washburn Award evening, because if I asked that, I would put my hand up too. I've been here, if it's your first time ever, I got here in February of 2020, and of course you know what happened right thereafter. And so we haven't been able to hold the celebration, and so it is such a special thing to welcome everybody back to give the museum's highest award, the Brad Washburn Award. It's been given to people you've all heard of, Jane Goodall and David Attenborough, Neil deGrasse Tyson, E.O. Wilson, Carl Sagan, Isaac Asimov. So it's a big part of what we're trying to say, that science is to a certain extent about storytelling. It's about the stories we tell about science and its ability to help humanity solve problems and create a better future. So that award is given to people who are great storytellers about science. It's not fundamentally an academic award. We have another one as well. Tonight, of course, we're going to give the award to someone who is an academic, but is also a great storyteller. It's given in honor of Brad Washburn, our legendary director, who was a director here for 40 years. But he was also known the world over, and there's many articles in the New York Times this year and other things about him as a cartographer and an explorer and an environmentalist. And he had a boldness about him that sometimes is reflected in the people we give the award to, and that boldness is reflected in this year's honoree as well. I know that our Maria Belén Power is going to introduce him more formally, but I do want to say this. Dr. Robert Bullard was born in Elba, Alabama. That is way down in the southeast part of the state, sort of on your way to, say, Pensacola. I lived for 17 years in Birmingham, Alabama. And I can tell you that when you graduate from high school in 1964 in Alabama, and then you teach high school in 1968 in Alabama, you have been able to work through some very, very difficult times. And he did so with great insight. And I think one of the things that he learned, that he was able to see, he had eyes to see, and he puts it very plainly, is that, wait, I have it all written down here, and it's so nicely written, and now I can't find it. Basically, that America has a pollution problem, and it has a race problem, and they're put in the same place at the same time. He was able to see that. But then he was able to say also, you know what, it's not supposed to be this way, and it doesn't have to be this way. And those two things put together make him such a great honoree. Well, he's going to be introduced by another great friend of the Museum of Science and a real hero, and that if you don't know Maria Belén Power, you should. She is the Undersecretary, this is a long title, she is the inaugural Undersecretary of Environmental Justice and Equity. That's the important part. The first Undersecretary of Environmental Justice and Equity. It's at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs in the Healy Driscoll administration. But the governor reached out and asked her to take this job, not only because it's important for the Commonwealth, because of who she is. She was the co-founder of Green Roots, which is an environmental justice organization in Chelsea, just a couple miles from here, and has done great work in trying to help that urban place have environmental justice and fairness in a place that needs it so much. And we have worked with her over the years and really admire everything you have done, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the stage, Maria.
I always have to do that. Buenas noches. Good evening. Thank you so much for the very kind introduction. It's really an honor to be here tonight. And actually, recently, I've had the opportunity to be here a couple times, one last week, when the Amplify Latinx was celebrating 100 Latino leaders in Massachusetts, including Fidel, my husband. So we had a real good time, and I know my daughters are probably really jealous that they can't be running around the museum tonight. So the Science Museum is really a special place, not just for Boston and the region, but for families and for me personally, but really championing environmental justice during this time. Like Tim said, my name is Maria Belén Power, and here's the title, Undersecretary of Environmental Justice and Equity, with Secretary Tepper under the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And tonight, if I could, I wish I was a little taller. I have the great pleasure of presenting the 2024 Bradford Washburn Award, to Dr. Bullard, to Dr. Robert Bullard. And I first met him 3 years ago when we were both nominated or appointed to be on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council in 2021. But of course, I had read heard, learned all about his work when I first was introduced to the environmental justice movement. For those of you who don't know, I am from Managua, Nicaragua, and I was raised during the war, in the Contra War and after the revolution. I don't really remember a day or a time where we didn't live, see, or experience deep economic inequities and the need for systemic change. I came to the US for college and ended up living in Minnesota for 6 years. Now, being from Nicaragua, I immediately sought out the Latino community, anything that would remind me of home. So even if pupusas are from El Salvador and tacos and tortas are from Mexico, that was my staple food every single day. There was something about the snow and the blizzards that didn't really feel quite right. Soon after landing, though, in Minneapolis, I got involved immediately in the immigrants' rights movement and in the workers' rights movement. At the time, there were huge raids happening all over the country, especially in factories and meatpacking facilities. And through a group that we called the Community Raid Response Team, we worked with immigrant families, preparing their kids to what would happen if they came home and their kids and their parents were taken by ICE. And so while I really deeply cared about the environment, I never really identified myself as an environmentalist. I felt, the wealthy, the gringos, the white, they can do that. I got the immigrants and I got the workers. The trees and the polar bears are being taken care of by a lot of, very good people, but it just felt to me, I just felt more identified with the immigrants' rights and the workers' rights movement coming from where I come from and coming from Nicaragua. It really didn't present to me the way that it feels now and the way that I have lived it. And that didn't happen until I got to Chelsea, just across the Mystic, that I learned that the very same folks that are suffering from deportation and wage theft are suffering from the highest rates of asthma, cardiovascular disease, of upper respiratory illnesses, and living the worst consequences of the climate crisis. Now, I'd like to show this picture from an artist, a photographer in Chelsea, Matt Frank. And it is because a lot of times folks, even in Boston and in the region, don't realize that communities like Chelsea carry significant burden for everyone. And we all benefit from these burdens. We all benefit from the things that we need, like jet fuel, like home heating fuel, but not everyone has to live near them or next to them. So Chelsea is the smallest city in the Commonwealth, for those of you who don't know. About 45, although people think more to 60,000, given the folks that don't participate in the census. Folks live in 1.8 square miles. 73% are minority, and the majority are Latinos and Latinas like myself. 24% live below the poverty level. So if you think about the airport, 100% of that jet fuel is on the Chelsea Creek. If you think about homes that need to be heated in the winter, 80% of that home heating fuel for the entire region is on the Chelsea Creek. All of the road salt that we need, 400,000 tons on the waterfronts of the Chelsea Creek that we all need, we all benefit, but there is an unequitable distribution of the burdens and the benefits. Now think about this. 80% is covered with impervious surface. 80% of Chelsea, impervious surface. Only 4% public green space. And only 2% covered by tree canopy. And we all know that all of this contributes to extreme heat. Mapping done by the Trust for Public Land showed that parts of Chelsea were averaging up to 140 degrees when nearby communities were 80 degrees. Now that has deep consequences and life or death consequences for people in Chelsea and other communities like Chelsea. Now, if the connections between public health, race, and class weren't clear before, the pandemic provided a very painful example of that. We were one of the hardest hit. We had one of the highest rates of infection for months. At times, it was 5 times higher than state average. So if those connections weren't real before, I hope we all remember what happened in 2020, 2021, 2022, and continues to happen. 80% of our workers were deemed essential workers. Our community did not have the luxury to work from home or to isolate. But Chelsea's not alone. There are many Chelseas in Massachusetts, and there are many Chelseas in the nation. These stories are just like others across the country. And the work that Dr. Robert Bullard has done in chronicling the stories of environmental justice communities across the country is simply invaluable. His academic research, advocacy, and scholarly work are pillars in our movement. For over 40 years, he has led with science, facts, and metrics. He was a delegate to the first People of Color EJ Summit in 1991, which developed the 17 principles of environmental justice. With over 18 books published, he has been an incredible advocate, and his work has defined us. I am personally and extremely grateful for all he has done, and I am humbled to be here tonight to honor him and his legacy. Now, more insights from those he has inspired. We have a short video.
I had grown up in a lower-income Black neighborhood with terrible air quality and a very high asthma rate.
Dr. Bullard was like the beginning. He gave us a new sense of language and a new sense of empowerment. When you say no to us, you got to tell us why.
We were asking the questions, why don't we have public access to our waterfront? Why is our waterfront lined with major industries? Why is it that our air is so polluted?
It helped us understand that combining science and data is never enough by itself.
The challenges that he's been seeing in Texas and Louisiana and across the Southern Belt, he's been seeing these challenges and he simply never gave up.
All that he knew, he shared it with us.
His work, it clicked for me. I wasn't imagining things. There was a relationship between race, policy, and environmental injustice.
It takes a Dr. Bullard to help you realize what you see when you look at environmental conditions in this country is that it is the negative environmental effects have been disproportionately borne by the people who are the least contributors to that problem.
For all of us who actually wanted to address these issues in a systemic way, and all we had available to us were rules and regulations and going and attacking in the courts, he was seeing action where he's been demanding action for so long.
We found a way to be in these boardrooms. I was sitting at the table and developing the equity process that we had more than just a seat. We also had ideas to do decision-making, not just listening, but engaging, being part of the overall process.
He didn't just open a new chapter on the way that we make change and systemic change in our culture. He developed an entirely new book on the topic.
When you look at Dr. Bullard and what he's gone through and what he's fought and how he's taught and what he's done on the national stage, our small community is part of a much larger national movement.
Bob Bullard never gave up.
It's almost like someone flicking the edge of a crystal glass. It rings out with clarity and purpose that everybody can hear.
He's been my mentor and supporting the next generation of advocates and leaders. He has always been my hero.
Please join us in welcoming Dr. Robert Bullard.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to thank all of those who decided to honor me with this award, the Brad Washburn Award. I am humbled. You do the work to try to get the job done, and hopefully you win. You're successful, but you never do it for awards. I accept. I accept on behalf of those communities that have needed help, assistance, in some cases guidance, technical support, moral support, and to understand that our movement for environmental, climate, economic, racial justice, gender justice, justice is just one movement. I'm a sociologist by training. I'm an environmental sociologist. But I tell people in a joking way, but I'm serious, that I do not do dead, stale sociology. I do what's scientifically called kick-ass sociology. I say that because what I have tried to do is to model my work after one of my heroes, a famous kick-ass sociologist, W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a researcher, he was a scholar, he was a scientist, political scientist, and he was an activist. He wrote books, and he helped found the oldest civil rights organization in the country. I don't have to call the names, you know the initials, NAACP. I got drafted into this work. This was not something that I started out my career. I got my PhD from Iowa State University in 1976. My wife and I, Linda McKeever Bullard, moved to Houston. In 1979, Linda's a lawyer, Linda McKeever Bullard. She came home one day and said, "Bob, I just sued the state of Texas." And now I worked for a state university, Texas Southern University. So technically, she sued my employer. She said, "I've just sued this company that was trying to put this sanitary landfill." Now, we know there is nothing sanitary about a landfill. That's where garbage goes. Doesn't go to heaven, goes to garbage landfill. And she said, I need somebody to, I just filed this lawsuit in federal district court, get a temporary restraining order, and I need somebody to put on a map where all the landfills, incinerators, garbage dumps, and put it on a map and tell who lives around it. And I need this in 10 days because I have to go into court. I said, "You need a sociologist, right?" She said, "That's what you are." So sometimes you have to do something when you don't set out to do it. In sociology, we call results, research findings that unexpected, but it's a discovery. We call it serendipitous. Linda developed the legal theory. My job was to design a study and the research methodology and to go get the data, use the science, use research, get the facts. I had 10 students in my research methods class at Texas Southern University, where I am now. I told my students, I said, "Students, we have a research project. And when your professor tells you that you got a research project, what you got to do? Research." This was before there was no Google, iPad, iPhone, GIS, none of that. This was 1979. I know that was long before some of you were born. I ran the data on punch cards. Yes, We did research in the library. In the old research library, we gathered old newspaper clippings and we ran old information that was on microfiche. I know it's in museums now. And so we had to, where's my phone? We can run this data now easily, but back then, there was no database, nothing was digitized. We had to go through old records. And the census data was on flat maps, roll them out, piecing them together. We used magic markers. It was like a science project in the 6th grade back then. Magic markers, yellow, green, orange, and red. And color code the percent black in the census tract and find the landfills and put the map pins. I'm taking you a process that we could run this just like now instantly. But what we found is that on the maps, we put the pins up, and less than 10% was yellow. And we had the gradations colors all the way up, green, orange, and red. Red was more than 50% black. More than 50% black. And most of the pins were in the red. From the 30s up until 1978, 5 out of 5 of the city-owned landfills, 6 out of 8 of the city-owned incinerators, and 3 out of 4 of the privately-owned landfills were in predominantly black neighborhoods. 82% of all the garbage dumped in Houston during that period of time was dumped in black communities. Now, was dumped in predominantly black communities. Now, that's like me saying my family is predominantly black. These are all black communities because Jim Crow did it. So the findings were such that 82% of all the waste is being dumped in black communities, but blacks only made up 25% of the population. Now, that's the imbalance. That was a discovery. We presented that to federal district court, and we lost in court. The judge, the senior judge, must have been 150 years old, white man, calling us nigras. Now, if you up north in Yankee land, but if down south, if somebody calls you a Negro, that's the N-word dressed up. We developed the legal theory and we developed the methodology that was solid. You put that together, you have something to go forward with. Even though you lost in court, we were able to publish articles in referee journals, write books. Something was there. Fast forward, understand, as it was said, I've written 18 books over 40 years. Those books are based on science, facts, data, research. Having the facts is never enough to prove in court or to get transformative change. The concept is marrying science, facts, data, research with action. That's our movement. That's our movement. That's what I've tried to do over these many years and recruit others. I told people that I am a proud U.S. Marine Corps Vietnam-era veteran. Hoorah! I am also a boomer. Proud of it, still fighting, still standing. But the Gens, Gen X, Y, Z, Zoomers, you outnumber my generation. But together, intergenerational mobilization, we are the majority. Let's act like it. I got a Times Earth Award honor. I forget when it was, January, somewhere around there. And I wrote an article, it's supposed to be a message to the next generation. My message to the next generation is we have to build a movement that no one kind of push back can push us back. So the long and short of it is that this quest for environmental climate justice, economic justice, energy justice, transportation justice, gender justice, is like a race, but it's no sprint. It's like a marathon relay. I know there's no such race in track and field, but it is when we talk about trying to get justice. We have to run our 26.2 miles and then pass the baton. I used to give this same little analogy when I said 26 miles, and I got corrected by Vice President Al Gore, who was a marathoner. He said, Dr. Bullard, it's 26.2 miles, and that .2 is the hardest. I said, oh, yes, sir, Vice President. So 26.2 miles, and then to pass the baton. You have to cheerlead, you have to mentor, and you don't just stand on the sideline and let the next generation just go and whatever. You have to have that smooth pass off, and then when we get to that .2, we need a kick. We have to finish strong. That's where we are right now, in this kick, where our movement for climate justice and building resilient communities, we can't be walking as if somehow we got a lot of time. I tell people I am optimistic, I'm hopeful, and I have faith. But as my grandmother, wise old lady, went to Sunday school every Sunday, told me that faith without work is what? Dead. Now, that should be more people saying that. You didn't go to Sunday school or you didn't learn that lesson. Faith without work is dead. Our movement is alive and well. We're going to finish strong because those generations coming after us, those small kids, met a young man and we took a photo together. I said, this work that I do with others is for young people. Young people. We work for those babies, whether in Chelsea or the South Bronx or whether in East LA or in Houston or Atlanta, who have asthma. The asthma death rate for black children is 8 times that of white children. That's unacceptable. We fight for children who can't vote, can't protest, can't file lawsuits, so we have to fight for the most vulnerable. When we do not protect the most vulnerable, we place everybody at risk. We learned that in Katrina, we learned that in COVID, we're learning it now. So let me just conclude, because I didn't turn my phone on to give me the beep, beep sign. This work that we do, we say it's really not a work, it's more like a mission that we have to accomplish because we don't have a lot of time to sit on the fence. We see what's happening in Florida. Back-to-back hurricanes. Before you can even get your house gutted out from flood hurricanes, there's another one coming in. We can't deny the fact that climate change is real and it's getting worse and worse and worse. We need to rapidly move forward to address this issue. And again, we have the tools. Now we're beginning to get the resources. This is the final thing I'm going to say. When we developed, when I say we, environmental justice centers, that the first 5 of those centers that were developed at universities in the 90s, there were only 5 to support an entire movement. All 5 of them were at HBCUs. Do you hear me? HB? You know, all 5 of them were at black colleges. Xavier University, Dr. Beverly Wright left Wake Forest and went back home, started. I left University of California, went back to Atlanta, started the Environmental Justice Resource Center. There was a center at Hampton University in Virginia. There was a center at Florida A&M University, and there was a center at Thurgood Marshall School of Law at Texas Southern University in Houston. All 5 of them. We didn't have a dime, but we knew we had to come back and do some work. Now, there's resources available now. And EPA, we thank you. We thank the Biden-Harris administration for the work that they've done and the Congress that they passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, $1.2 trillion. We thank for the $69 billion worth of B for the Inflation Reduction Act, $60 billion for environmental justice, $60 billion. We never had that kind of money. $60 billion for clean energy transition. When I was on, you saw I was in the Oval Office when Bill Clinton signed the executive order. We didn't have any money assigned to it. There was no kind of money resources available then. 29 years later, President Biden signed the executive order on environmental justice day before Earth Day last year, April 21st. That money was available, and some of us have been successful in getting. The Bullard Center that I direct received one of the EPA's Thriving Communities grant makers. We got one of the $50 million EPA grants to distribute monies to grassroots communities in Region 6. We got one of the grants with our Green Clean Energy Fund of Texas. We were successful in getting one of the Solar for All grants. We got $156 million to do solar on solarized green infrastructure for our HBCUs and some of our MSIs. Understand that you don't do it to get money, to get awards. You do it because it needs to be done. In some cases, the resources come your way and the awards come your way. Much appreciated. Thank you very much. Thank you.
1, 2. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Can we give a round of applause again to Dr. Bullard? My name is Kevin Powell. I'm a lover of this museum. And Dr. Bullard, just thank you for who you are and all you've done. Let's give it up for the staff here, James and Dr. Rich, and all the folks who made this happen today. And I want to invite Cate. Please let's invite Cate up. I'm going to introduce Cate properly. And Belén Power, please come back up. Cate, you're going to be sitting over here. How are y'all feeling out there? Dr. Bullard, I just need to say this as a New Yorker whose mama is from the South. Thank you. And, you know, the first time I ever heard the term environmental justice was probably in the late 1980s. I didn't really know what it was, but I heard your name, you know, and to meet you in person for the first time is a great honor, and just thank you for the work that you do. I really appreciate you, and congratulations on this honor. I know you don't do it for the accolades, but I think it's important for us to give people their flowers while they're here with us. Thank you. I want to, Cate, I just want to introduce you really quickly. Where's your book at? Here it is. Cate is the book is called Climate Action for Busy People, and this is a book that is really, am I right, Cate, a way for folks to understand environmental justice in a very accessible way.
And what to do about it.
Say that again.
And what to do about it.
And what to do about it. Where can folks get the book?
Anywhere books are sold.
That's the answer I was hoping for. Which means support your independent local bookstores, right? Absolutely. And then there's that other conglomerate that we're not going to say here. Support the independent bookstores. I want to jump into this because we don't have a lot of time, but this is important. And you know, my gosh, my heart is full just listening to you, to all of you speak. And you know, if I can start with you, Dr. Bullard, you gave a charge about what we need to do, the mission. And you talked about the importance of the younger generations coming behind us. If you can go back to 1979 and speak to your younger self, given all that you've experienced since then, what would you say to your younger self about what you were literally drafted into by your wife back then?
Oh, wow. I'd say, younger self, you need to get busier to recruit more folks to get this. We were somewhat successful, but we did not have the communication apparatus and all those things at our fingertips to get more of our issues lifted up and more of our organizations, institutions to understand why this is so important. And I wish I could have been a better communicator and a better teacher to get these messages in our throughout our different communities and connect those dots better.
Maria Belén Power, you are familiar, obviously, and thank you for your kind words about the doctor early, and thank you for the work that you do. Can we give Maria a round of applause, please? It's a pleasure to meet you. Con mucho gusto. Your powerful work here in Massachusetts, can you talk about why Dr. Bullard's work is relevant to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and why there has been this Office of Environmental Justice has been established, and what are some of your priorities locally, since all movements are local?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Environmental justice has really, as we all know, is not anything new, right? Not for the past 10 or 20 or 30 years. It really has been part of who we are, the inequities that we live in, for a really long time. And I think that sometimes we try to ignore those inequities and we put a blind eye and we try to just go along progressive Massachusetts doing our thing and not really addressing the root of the problem, right? And so I think the creation of my office is really highlighting the importance of environmental justice and climate justice and a real commitment from the Healy-Driscoll administration to invest in it and not just to talk about it, not to campaign about it, but to really put money where it needs to go, to really invest in language access, to invest in meaningful engagement, and to make sure that the benefits and the burdens that we currently have and that we will have with the energy transition are distributed equitably.
Thank you, thank you. And Kate, I want to introduce you properly because I realized I didn't do that since we already, our other two speakers are here. Cate Mingoya Lafochon is a people-centered climate adaptation planner, community organizer, educator, parent, and cautious optimist. Can y'all say cautious? Optimist. That's a great term. Is that your term? Borrowed it. Raised in an environmental justice neighborhood, she is committed to furthering a future where all people live in clean and joyful communities. Clean and joyful communities. And I want to encourage folks to go to Museum of Science website to see all their bios. The bios are incredible, but can you talk a little bit about your work, starting with this book? But what struck me, you were raised in an environmental justice neighborhood. Where was that neighborhood at?
I grew up in Queens, right at the intersection of two expressways.
Queens, New York City.
Queens, New York City, yeah. And it was a neighborhood where we had a huge pack of kids, and we loved to run up and down the block and play, unless we were in the hospital for asthma. And all of us carried our pumps on us, and all of us were constantly in and out of the hospital. And it wasn't until I was older and got to look at some of the maps and the data to realize that our mostly Black, low-income community looked the way that it did for a reason.
You know, you made me think about something Dr. Bullard brought up, which is I grew up in a community in New Jersey, Jersey City, an inner city environment. It seemed like everyone had asthma. Everyone had asthma. I mean, on a real simple level, and this is for all of you, you know, what are some of the things that people need to look for in their communities if they're just beginning to get aware of this issue of environmental justice and something is wrong in our particular communities? Why are certain people getting certain diseases? Why are certain people sick with certain things? What should they be looking for? What should they be thinking about? Any of you, all of you, please.
I think where infrastructure is cited, we tend to think that things like highways and transfer stations and incinerators just kind of got there by magic, but a human being made a decision to put them in a certain location, which means that certain folks have to suffer the consequences of that infrastructure. So paying attention to where's the highway on-ramp, what places do and don't have drainage in them, what places are located next to bus storage facilities, and just paying attention to how these resources are distributed and ask the question, is it fair that so much of that is there?
Dr. Bullard?
Yeah, this is not a plug, but I wrote 2 books on transportation. I wrote a book in 1997 called Just Transportation, Dismantling Race and Class Barriers to Mobility, and wrote another book titled Highway Robbery, Transportation Racism, New Routes to Equity. America is segregated and so is pollution. If you look at infrastructure, all infrastructure is not created equal. There's a pattern across the country. It could be tantamount to what we call infrastructure apartheid. Racial redlining that occurred in the 30s or the 20s or the 40s that footprint is with us in the 2020s today. The red line neighborhoods are more likely, that were flooded, in 80 years ago, are more likely to have pollution hotspots, more likely to flood, more likely to have urban heat islands. Urban heat islands is nothing more than a fancy word of saying, there ain't no parks, green space, green canopy, trees, and it's hot as hell. And if you look at the health impacts, when you combine heat, pollution, and poverty, and lack of access to good, clean, affordable public transportation, you get these overlaying of health disparities, and you get this cascading bad health outcomes. Not rocket science, and a lot of it is not even science. Let me correct that. A lot of it is political science. And we can, just like planners have planned for, in many cases, this in their designs, in their construction, in their funding, in their finance, we can unplan that kind of foolishness that's creating, that's killing us. Your neighborhood shouldn't kill you. Your neighborhood should nurture you, your family, and your neighbors.
That leads me to a question for you, Maria. And your neighborhood should not kill you. In what ways is Massachusetts, since again all movements are local, a leader in environmental justice?
I mean, there's a lot that we're doing, that the Healy Driscoll administration has not only committed but is doing right now. We're going after every single federal dollar, trying to get every grant that we can and bring it to Massachusetts. We recently got Solar for All. I think you mentioned Solar for All in your remarks. We got $156 million for solar in Massachusetts, and that's incredible to help low-income communities, communities of color, make sure that we transition and we are able to have access to those technologies. A lot of times it's really expensive to even think about, my roof is leaky, how am I gonna address and put solar panels? That's not for me. Other people can do that, but not myself. And so really having access, opening the door for everyone to have access to solar energy. We just announced one of the largest procurements of offshore wind in New England. So we're going really hard at offshore wind, solar, and really looking at how can we make the biggest impact right now. I talk about Solar for All. We have a grant program called Decarbonizing Homes, and we went from $26 million to added $40 million additional to the grant. So the hardest to decarbonize buildings can have the resources to go green, to electrify, and to make sure that, again, it's accessible to everyone, not only those that can afford it.
Wow. And I want to also acknowledge David Sittenfeld and helping to formulate these questions. But it behooves me to ask the question of all of you, please. How do you respond to people who say there's no environmental problem, there's no climate change, there's no global warming? Because we hear that a lot. How do you respond to people when they say that?
Let me just say, I live in the state of denial called Texas. I live in the Gulf Coast. And if we can look at what's happening along the Gulf Coast in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, in the Gulf Coast, we used to plan for disasters June through November. That's hurricane season. We're in it now. But Winter Storm Uri hit Texas and Louisiana in February of 2021. Now, February, it went down to 9 degrees. Now, you may be used to that in Massachusetts, but we're not used to single digit. Texas is not connected to the grid, so we didn't have anybody to help us. The lights went out, the power was off, the water treatment system, no power. We had no water, no lights. It was horrible. Now, folks in Texas who are in authority, they don't say climate change, they say severe weather events. Severe weather event, euphemism, but it's real. It's coming fast and furious. Heat waves, droughts, flooding, storms, cold. Understand that there's agreement that something needs to happen, needs to be done, but there's still a lot of denial. And Florida, I don't live in Florida, so I can talk about Florida. You get hit with Helene, and then you get hit with Milton. back to back. And you're not ready for addressing it in a comprehensive way throughout Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, going all the way up. The South is very climate vulnerable. And when you disaggregate and go deep down into the areas in terms of within the South, those communities that have been harmed by Jim Crow segregation, by not getting the investments, our communities are more prone to flooding. Our communities don't have the resilience to bounce back or whatever. Or there's some messing over monies that go directly to the state, and you got a red legislature and you got blue cities. That's the kind of political science that we have to address that somehow holds us back in building a healthy, sustainable, resilient communities in this era of climate change. That's why we need everybody working on this together, on solutions, not just identifying problems, but working on solutions.
Before I pivot to you, Cate and Maria, I just need to say I did about a year or two worth of Hurricane Katrina relief work when that went down. We brought about 700 young people down to the Gulf Coast from all over the country to help. And I remember someone saying to me, do you realize this could happen in New York City? And I said, absolutely not. About 8 years later, something called Superstorm Sandy happened in New York City. You're absolutely, and it affected these same communities, black and brown communities. Cate and Maria, please, how much of your work, I want you to build on the question that Dr. Bullard just answered, is actually educating people. And can you give us some practical things you say to people when they're like, no, this is not real, this is fake?
Yeah, so it almost doesn't matter if people think it's real or fake or not, because the impacts are still going to happen. And one of the things that we found in our community organizing, and we're in 21 different cities, but do this climate organizing work in about 18, is if you bring a map of someone's house and you overlay something like land surface temperature or something like impermeable pavement or tree canopy cover, arguments about whether or not the climate crisis sort of become irrelevant, because you can point out and say, how come this part of town is about 20 degrees hotter on the same summer day at the same time than this wealthier, wider neighborhood? Or why is it in the northern part of Elizabeth, New Jersey, where it's mostly Latino people, there's absolutely no tree canopy cover? It's about 2%. But if you go to the southwestern parts of it, you've got 60, 70, 80% tree canopy with these lush parks and green spaces. And it becomes less of a, does this exist, but this is your community. This is your city. Do you want to do something about this? Once you see the data laid out like that, it's really hard to look away, and it almost removes the challenge of, does the climate crisis exist? Because it doesn't matter, it's real hot, and we need to deal with the reality that it's real hot.
Maria, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I, as a community organizer, coming from Green Roots, our work was, every day in the community, door knocking and building the power in Chelsea and East Boston. My work now is a little bit different. Although I will always be a community organizer, it is also about educating, and it is also about making sure that policymakers are thinking about those impacts that may not be as obvious. I had a friend before taking the job who said, make sure you keep talking to your people, because it becomes really hard to look out the window. So when you're in this work every day, day in and day out, and you're not connected to the folks on the ground, it becomes really hard to see how your decision-making or how your policies are having adverse consequences or are really damaging the lives of people, and to see the differences between, the Wellesleys of the world and the Chelseas of the world, to really understand how everyday decisions that we make in my office have long-lasting consequences that we may never even see, but that are really critical to make sure that we get them right.
Dr. Bullard, you made it a point to speak to younger people, and I'm sure you do that on a regular basis. Why is it important for my generation, Generation X, Millennials, Gen Z, to be aware of the environmental justice movement? And again, this question is for all of you. And how can we reach them, given we do have these gadgets and things now that we didn't have in 1979 when you began? What should we be doing?
Yeah, well, I think it's very important to understand that every successful progressive movement in this country has had vibrant, energetic young people and students pushing the envelope. I came out of the 60s and we were fearless. We weren't afraid to go to jail, but my dad said, don't you go to jail. but the idea of seeing this climate crisis and having young people to take it on as their issue of the day, and seeing how this mobilization, now I'm talking about young people. For example, we have an HBCU climate change conference every year. We didn't have for 2 years with COVID, but next year it'll be coming up on 10th anniversary of the climate change conference. And the conference is always held in New Orleans. And for some reason, students like to go to New Orleans. We don't know why. But at this conference, it's for college students, not just HBCU college students, but all college students who are dealing with environment and climate justice. And we also have elementary kids, like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, presenting poster sessions and involving at this conference so that they see what we see and we interact. We have to, bridge that generational divide so that we understand that majority that I'm talking about as a collective and not see ourselves isolated. We can organize with the gadgets, but there's nothing that will replace organizing face-to-face, physically in a meeting where we're talking about. We are social animals, creatures, in terms of, this is my sociology, of organizing, mobilizing, empathizing, and coming together. Now that's where I think we have to step it up. We have to step it up because been doing this for 40-something years. We don't have 40 years to fiddle while Rome is burning, and it is burning. But we have solutions now, if only we just commit and apply. Commit and apply those solutions and own those solutions, not just for rich people on the hill, but for those in low-lying areas and those who are on the front line, fence line of these petrochemical plants and fossil fuel industries, et cetera. We have to own these issues and act as if our grandmothers live next door. And we know we love our grandmothers and our children. That's how we have to respond to this crisis, this emergency.
Yeah.
That's blinking red right now.
Blinking red. Kate and Maria, before we go to the audience questions, a few questions, please, if you want to, I would love you to respond to it as well. How do we reach, or just give me some practical examples of things you do to reach even younger people, or our generation or younger. How do you do it? Either of you, both of you, please.
I'll talk about the work that some of my colleagues that are in the room are doing, or former colleagues at Green Roots. I do think that community organizing is the most important way to get people empowered, mobilized, educated, and ready to take action. And that applies to youth as well. There's a group of young people that work at Green Roots called the Eco Crew, the Environmental Chelsea Organizers. And they're high school students that are paid to go, right? It's not an unpaid internship. It's a job.
Yes.
Get paid to go and lead campaigns on environmental justice that affect their own communities. So write letters, go to city council, go testify, organize with your youth, mobilize your youth to go somewhere. And it's things like that that are really shaping the policymakers of the future, or the directors, the CEOs, the future leaders. And that really starts really young. When a high school student is doing those activities, as they are growing up, as they are becoming mature, it is shaping our society.
Kate.
Intergenerational coalitions, I think, are the foundation of any stable, wise, and lasting change. I think you need the criticality of youth who tend to see things a little bit more black and white. Why have you not fixed this problem that is so obvious to me? Yeah. And then older folks who understand the nuance and the players, and there's a tremendous amount of collective power. And I think that having residents, youth, elders, everyone in between recognized as true experts in their community, people who are compensated for their time, compensated for their knowledge, is incredibly important to any type of true and lasting equity, because there's no one who knows their neighborhood better than the people who live there. We tend to use a lot of geospatial data, and we partner with fancy people like NASA and the Urban Systems Lab, but a lot of the things like flooding nuanced flooding that will ruin the clothes that you store in the basement or cause mold to grow on the drywall of your home, those don't show up on those maps. But where it does show up is at people's front door. And so treating people as experts who have knowledge of any hydrologist, any planner, anybody with letters after their name, is a really important part of achieving this change equitably.
You stress community gathering the data because they live there. That's what you're saying. They get that. Yes, sir. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I had to co-sign the community science model that's blossoming across the country. Has so much credibility to the more standard mapping, geospatial, whatever, or the data sets, because communities can ground truth what's really happening in real time. They can tell you there's no grocery store over there now, it's shown on the map, or this thing just came there, it's next door. I mean, they can tell you whether or not these environmental economic justice screening tool that came out of the White House, that I serve on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, whether or not it's accurate or not, because some of the data is old. Some of the census data is old. And so having the community science to supplement, complement, and have community scientists who are publishing in referee journals as co-authors, in some cases lead authors. This is what we talk about, recognizing indigenous knowledge and understanding. As I said, my grandmother had a 6th grade education, but she had a PhD in living. And she could tell you what's going on, and she could count money like a calculator.
She's like my mother. A PhD in living. Let's give them a round of applause. I want to open the floor up to a few questions. Thank you. Wow. And again, I want to stress Cate's book, Climate Action for Busy People. Climate Action for Busy People. You can buy it anywhere and everywhere. That's right. It just came out this year. June. Wow. Congratulations. Do we have a mic out there for some questions? Some questions for folks. So I'm using this. Oh, sorry. That's what technology's for. Can an individual best make an impact on climate change locally or globally? This is from someone who chose to remain anonymous. This is for anyone. Can we just have one person answer the question unless other folks want to answer it? Can an individual best make an impact on climate change locally or globally? Any of you?
Everything starts local.
Everything starts local. Y'all agree? This is from Dr. Harold, I believe, who's at Harvard. In your decades of work advocating for environmental justice, Dr. Bullard, I believe this is for, how do you see the role of community-led initiatives evolving in the face of increasing climate change impacts? And what are the most effective ways to ensure marginalized communities have a seat at the decision-making table?
Bring them into the table. Let them to the room. This ain't rocket science. Just do it.
Just do it.
That's what we've been doing for a long time, and we've had some success in the last few years. As I said, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council is a result of elevating environmental justice from the EPA level with the signing of the executive order, which you had a NEJAC, not knee-jerk, National Environmental Justice Advisory Council that was under Clinton. 29 years later, you elevate environmental justice to the White House level, to CEQ. And so you are able to directly send recommendations to the President of the United States. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. We're an advisory. We don't work for the government. We advise. But let me just give this. Those of us who are on that WEJAC, we are relentless. And those of us who are at academic institutions, we tell them, we will speak our minds because what? We have tenure. And the fact that we are fighting for those who are not in those rooms, because there's only 26 of us. We represent the whole country of EJ communities. Not speaking for them, because we have a public meeting sessions, but it's important that when we get in those positions that we try to speak up, speak out, and advocate for, not speak for, advocate for when those communities are not in those rooms.
I think this is an important follow-up question to what you all are saying. And this is for Cate, Maria, please jump in. What is the balance between working within systems like state or federal government and pushing for change from outside, like protests or lawsuits? Can you do both? Should you do both?
I think you have to do both. You can't work just in one space. I'm a really big believer in hyper-local action. I believe the best change that you can do is by identifying the systems that you work and act in. But I would also, sort of building off the prior question, encourage folks to, if you're looking to get people involved, people in environmental justice communities, you need to look around and make sure that there's room for them in that space. You have a responsibility to do that. I think we talk a lot in our dominant culture about privilege, and it kind of has like a nasty tinge to it, like, you're privileged. Privilege is a call to action. You have the ability to pull people into your spaces, to open the door, to engage in authentic shared leadership and decision making, and to choose to cede power. You have to choose to cede your voice as the primary one. So if you're wondering how to get people involved, let them in the room, find a seat at the table, go to where they are, and then also pay attention to when those people aren't in the room and use that power and privilege that you have to name that explicitly, loudly, clearly, openly, consistently.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think everything has a role. There's a reason why protesting works, right? There's a reason why people getting arrested works, and policymakers, there's a reason why. So there is a role for everyone, and I think it is just really important to stay connected to the folks that are the most impacted. But the impact, we need lawyers, we need scientists, we need public health experts, we need GIS experts, we need everyone, but we need everyone working together, and with the focus of improving the lives of the most vulnerable people, but everyone has a role to play in this.
That question was from Andres Ballesteros, and I think this question ties into what you just said, Maria. How can people, bringing it back to local in the Boston/Massachusetts suburbs, help support inner city environmental justice? Folks with privilege, what can you do? What can they do? What should they be doing? And not just here, Boston, Massachusetts, but around the country. If you come from privilege, if you're in a community that doesn't suffer from some of the things we're talking about, what can they do? What should they be doing? That's the question.
More.
Period. Period with a T at the end. More.
No, more. No, I think, early on, maybe 30 years ago, there were some white people who said, well, I don't live in those communities and I don't know what can we do? Can we help? We said, yes, there's a lot you can do. You don't have to be poisoned to understand that we need to stop the poisoning. And in terms of whether they're lawyers or whether they're scientists or whether they're people with all kinds of expertise or whether they have access to resources, doors that can be open, that they can go through, that some of us may not be able to go through, making recommendations in terms of great projects. Not to say you tap them on the shoulder for whatever, but the idea is speak up and talk about in a room where that's very monochromatic, to say something's wrong with this. We need not to color coordinate, but at least we need to make some improvements. Now, we need some powerful folks to say that, privileged folks to say that, and say this is unacceptable.
What have you seen in these 45 years since 1979 in terms of more folks who have privilege jumping in? How's it changed? How's it shifted?
It's changed a lot.
Okay.
It's changed a lot because I can recall way back when I would be the only person sitting in the room, and I'm looking around like, when I'm in Atlanta, I'm like, whoa, this is Atlanta, Chocolate City. So why is I'm the only person in the room talking about sprawl and residential apartheid, et cetera? So it's changed, but we still have a lot to do.
More.
More. One word.
Maria, Cate.
I mean, I would say, follow the lead of the folks that are the most impacted. So if you think you have a solution, just make sure you're always connected to the folks that are impacted by the issue that you're addressing. And so there's a lot of work to do, and there's a huge role to play, especially by people who have power and privilege. a lot of times these activists, these crazy people that get arrested, you know, they get thrown to the side. And what we need is people to speak up who are not those crazy people who get arrested, but really to speak up and to do that formally and to write and to call and to do the actions that are really representing those voices, not what you think needs to happen.
I love that. It's speaking with someone, not on behalf of them, and taking the solutions and ideas that they have seriously, so really honoring that expertise. We were organizing in Richmond, Virginia, and there's this intersection that used to flood, like up to your knee level flooding. It was right across from the bus stop where the kids go to school, right next to where the city bus stop was for people to get to work. And we looked at it and we said, this flooding looks like a drainage problem. You probably need a cistern, there's an engineering solution. And the resident said, no, actually we want trees, because people speed and we want the trees to slow traffic by creating some visual diversity. We need the rainwater to get soaked up. And if you've ever sat at a bus stop in Virginia in the summer, it is so hot. And there was no shade from the city, so they wanted that shade to be provided. So residents were able to come up with these incredibly nuanced, creative solutions that pet a lot of cats with one hand. So taking their leadership, their knowledge, and their solutions as seriously as anyone else is also key.
Wow. Let's give a round of applause to Maria Belén Power, Cate Mingoya Lefatron. Climate action for busy people. You can get it everywhere. I'm a fellow writer. We got to push the books. And absolutely our honoree tonight, Dr. Robert Bullard. Thank you so much. And before we wrap up, the president of the museum, Mr. Ritchie, is going to come back up. There he is. Let's give President Ritchie a round of applause again. He wants to say a few words, a few more thank yous. How are y'all feeling out there? Y'all good? Y'all can do better than that. Let's give a real wonderful panel. A lot of insight.
So we got to applaud everybody but our host tonight, Kevin Powell, one of the great men of letters in the United States of America. So Kevin, thank you so much.
All right. Woo-hoo. Yeah.
Just another reminder that this is just the first of 2 days. Tomorrow, this place will be filled with over 100 kids, and they'll get a chance to hear this message tomorrow. They start tonight at the aquarium, and they're coming back here for tomorrow, so we will move to action. Thank you with these young folks that are here. I want to thank the Washburn Awards Committee. If you can just raise your hand, thank you for making this happen. And then I want everybody to know that Bradford Washburn's daughter, Betsy Washburn Cabot, is here. If you could raise your hand. And her two nephews. Great to have the family in the house. Our time continues upstairs with a wonderful dinner. Let's go continue the conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our panel.